what can I say? It's tough to speak after you play 3 hours against another. So.
How can one man's defeat become another's greatest triumph? That question echoed across the tennis world just days ago, when Lorenzo Musetti, a young Italian prodigy, found himself living through a twist of fate so bizarre that even he struggled to believe it was real. Moments after losing what should have been the most important match of his season, he was suddenly, unbelievably, handed a ticket to the ATP Finals, one of the most elite tournaments in all of tennis. It all began in Athens. Musetti had one goal: win the Hellenic Championship and secure his spot among the world's best. Whereas across the net stood Novak Djokovic, the gatekeeper, the man who has ended more dreams than any other player alive. The atmosphere was electric. Every serve, every rally felt like a test of destiny. Musetti fought like a man possessed. His one-handed backhand carved through the air, his footwork crisp, his energy raw. For moments he even had Djokovic rattled. But champions like Novak always find a way. Experience, precision, mental steel, they all converge in those final points. And just like that, Musetti's dream shattered. When the last ball flew long, the crowd erupted for Djokovic. Musetti stood still, shoulders heavy, staring at the scoreboard. His season, his hopes, his path to Turin, gone. He shook Djokovic's hand at the net, a polite smile masking a storm of disappointment. As he left the court, he believed it was over. Back in the locker room, silence. A young man alone with his thoughts, replaying the match in his mind. Reporters were already writing headlines. Musetti misses finals again. He had come so close, yet it wasn't enough. That's the cruel beauty of sport. It doesn't care about effort, only results. But destiny, it seems, wasn't done with him. Minutes later, as Djokovic celebrated his victory, whispers began to spread through the players' lounge. Something was off. Novak wasn't heading to the press conference. Instead, he was seen talking quietly with his coach, rubbing his wrist. Within the hour, the story broke. Djokovic withdraws from the ATP Finals due to injury. The world gasped. The man who had just won was stepping away, and the rules were clear. His place would go to the next in line. That name? Lorenzo Musetti. In an instant, everything flipped. The locker room that felt like a tomb of failure turned into the birthplace of redemption. Musetti's phone buzzed with messages. Journalists, friends, family. He blinked in disbelief. What? You mean, I'm in? He laughed. A real, uncontrollable laugh. Part relief, part shock. He even remembered the moment right after their match when Djokovic had said, almost teasingly, "Maybe you'll still go to Turin." At the time, Musetti thought it was a joke. But fate, it seemed, had a strange sense of humor. As he packed his bags again, this time for Turin, he whispered to himself, "You never really know when life is done surprising you." Athens, late afternoon. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes your heartbeat sink with this crowd's roar. Lorenzo Musetti walked onto the court with a calm that didn't quite fit his age. Across from him, Novak Djokovic, a man whose name alone carried the weight of decades of dominance. For the young Italian, this wasn't just another match. It was a doorway. Win, and he would enter the ATP Finals for the first time in his career. Lose, and the dream would dissolve into another lesson learned too soon. From the very first serves, it was clear this was no ordinary contest. Djokovic came out sharp, his eyes cold, his rhythm clinical. But Musetti didn't play like an underdog. He fired back with flair, slicing through Novak's control with unpredictable variety. Drop shots, angles, spins that made the Serbs stretch for every ball. The crowd could feel it. Something rare was happening. The student was daring to test the master. Each rally was a story of its own. Youth's courage against experience's precision. And for brief, shimmering moments, Musetti looked like he might do the impossible. He took the first set in a tiebreak, unleashing a roar that echoed through the stands. Djokovic nodded, almost respectfully. He'd seen this before in a young challenger on fire, daring to dream. But champions don't crumble, they adapt. The second set became a war of attrition, every rally longer, every breath heavier. Djokovic began to read Musetti's rhythm, returning with the kind of accuracy that crushes hope. The Serb's forehand was merciless, his backhand an instrument of control. Musetti's flair started to fade into frustration. His body language changed. Glances at the sky, clenched fists, small sighs between points. The crowd, once electric, now murmured in tension. By the final set, Novak was in full command. Musetti fought, but you could feel it. The tide had turned. The last game ended not with an explosion, but with a quiet exhale. Djokovic raised his arms, another victory added to the endless list. Musetti stood still, absorbing the silence that follows heartbreak. And then came that moment. At the net, Djokovic leaned in with a half smile and said something few caught. "Maybe you'll still go to Turin." Musetti laughed. A small, puzzled laugh, thinking it was a joke, a kind gesture from a champion to ease the sting of defeat. Little did he know, those words would echo back to him days later like a prophecy fulfilled. In the press room, Novak mentioned a small wrist issue, brushing it off as nothing serious. Nobody questioned it. He looked fine. He had just dominated another final after all. But behind the scenes, whispers began to surface, like about fatigue, about strategy, about whether Djokovic was preparing for a longer game than anyone realized. Musetti, meanwhile, returned to his hotel, alone, tired, replaying every missed shot in his mind. He couldn't shake Novak's words. "Maybe you'll still go to Turin." They hung there like a riddle waiting to be solved. Sometimes fate gives you a sign. You just don't recognize it until it's too late. The news broke like lightning. Novak Djokovic withdraws from the ATP finals due to injury. At first, no one believed it. Reporters thought it was a typo. Fans assumed it was a rumor. How could a man who had just lifted a trophy, smiling and waving, suddenly step away from the biggest event of the season? But as confirmations rolled in, the disbelief turned into chaos. Within minutes, every major sports outlet lit up. Social media exploded with theories and memes. One fan wrote, "Only Novak could beat a man and then help him qualify in the same breath." Another said, "That's the most Djokovic thing ever." The tennis world was divided. Some accused him of faking an injury to rest before the next season. Others defended him, citing his long-standing wrist issue. But in the middle of that storm, one man's life quietly changed forever. Lorenzo Musetti was sitting in his hotel room in Athens, scrolling through his phone when the notification appeared. "Djokovic out. Musetti replaces him in Turin." He froze. For a few seconds he thought it was a joke, clickbait, maybe even a cruel prank. But then his phone started buzzing nonstop. Teammates, reporters, the ATP itself, all confirming the same unbelievable truth. He was in the same tournament he had dreamed about for years, the same one he thought had slipped through his fingers just hours ago, was now calling his name. He couldn't stop laughing, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. Life, destiny, whatever you want to call it, had decided to give him a second chance. "Novak told me he might not play," Musetti said later, still grinning in disbelief. "I thought he was joking. I guess he wasn't." As the headlines spread, the reactions kept coming. Carlos Alcaraz, the young Spanish superstar, was asked about the sudden lineup change. He smiled and said, "I prefer facing Lorenzo instead of Novak." The room laughed, but everyone knew there was truth in the humor. Facing Djokovic indoors was a nightmare no one wanted. Suddenly the entire tournament looked different. Without Novak, the field opened up. Every player, and Alcaraz, Taylor Fritz, and Alex de Minaur, sensed a chance that wasn't there before. But none had more to gain than Musetti. For him, this wasn't just luck. It was destiny testing his readiness. He had gone from heartbreak to headline in less than 24 hours, from watching the finals on TV to playing in it, from losing to the best to replacing the best. Behind the scenes, reports began to surface. Djokovic had been managing wrist pain for weeks. His team insisted the withdrawal was precautionary, not dramatic. But the timing, right after beating Musetti, left fans speculating. Some called it poetic. Others called it cruel. Whatever it was, it changed everything. The cameras that had followed Novak's dominance now turned toward the young Italian. A new story was being written. One of irony, opportunity, and redemption. That's the beauty of tennis. In one moment, your career can twist in a direction that you never imagine. One man's exit becomes another man's entrance. One chapter closes, another begins. All within a single afternoon. And for Lorenzo Musetti, the story was only getting started. Turin! The air was cold, electric. The kind of energy that makes every step echo louder than it should. Under the blinding arena lights, Lorenzo Musetti stepped out to a standing ovation. For a moment he closed his eyes. He could hear it all. The Italian cheers, the camera shutters, the disbelief turning into pride. This was supposed to be Djokovic's stage, yet here he was, walking into destiny dressed in its disguise. He wasn't naive. Everyone knew he hadn't earned this ticket the usual way. He hadn't beaten his way into the finals. Fate had handed him a second chance. But that, he realized, didn't make it any less real. Sometimes, he told the press with a small smile, life gives you a door you didn't knock on. You can either step through or spend the rest of your life wondering what's on the other side. In his first practice session, you could sense something different. The nerves were gone, replaced by a quiet fire. He wasn't there to prove he belonged. He was there to prove that destiny doesn't make mistakes. Across the net, he saw faces like Alcaraz, Fritz, de Minaur, all hungry, all ready to fight, and yet none of them carried the same strange story that had brought him here. The first match was tense. Every serve, every forehand carried the weight of gratitude and disbelief. The crowd roared louder for him than anyone else. They weren't just cheering for a player. They were cheering for what he represented. Hope, unpredictability, the beauty of never giving up. Reporters started calling it the Musetti miracle, but he didn't see it that way. Miracles don't happen to those who sit and wait, he said. They happen to those who keep playing, even when the game looks over. As the tournament unfolded, Musetti's story became bigger than the matches themselves. It was about a generation rising, about the shifting of tennis's old order. Djokovic's shadow still loomed, watching from the sidelines, perhaps with a knowing smile. Maybe he too understood that his withdrawal wasn't an end, but a passing of the torch. When Musetti walked off the court after his final match, win or lose, the crowd gave him the kind of applause reserved for legends. Not because he had conquered the tournament, but because he had conquered the moment. And as he stood before the flashing cameras, the question hung in the air. Was it luck? Was it fate? Or was it proof that the universe rewards those who refuse to surrender? He smiled again, that same humble grin he wore in Athens, and said softly, "Whatever it was, I'm grateful, because sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what you were meant for." The screen fades to black, the crowd's cheer still echoing. So what do you think? Was this destiny, coincidence, or just the beautiful chaos of sport? If you believe that fate has a way of surprising even the most prepared among us, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more tales where defeat turns into destiny. Because in the world of sports, and in life, every loss hides the seed of a miracle, waiting for the right moment to bloom.